beans, and squash? Think again. You're about to uncover 25 real historical recipes, from blood-boiled corn soup and charred ant broth to boiled skunk with juniper berries. These dishes may sound shocking, but they were never gimmicks. Each was rooted in ceremony, survival, and deep respect for the land. This isn't a horror story about food. It's a tribute to the strength, creativity, and traditions of native communities. Stick around, and you'll uncover 25 untold dishes that reveal a forgotten world of survival, skill, and flavor. Some are wild, some are sacred, and a few will leave your jaw on the floor. 1. Acorn worm stew. At first glance, it looked like a bowl of thick brown soup, but hidden beneath the surface were tiny white worms, stirred in on purpose. Across California and parts of the Pacific Northwest, tribes like the Miwok and Po, the creamy little grubs that tunneled through the acorns after they dropped. While most people today would throw that away, native families once saw it as extra protein gifted by nature. They'd grind the acorns into a meal, leach out the bitterness with water, then simmer it slowly with herbs, sometimes mixing in wild greens or bits of smoked meat. At the end, in went the worms, soft, mild, and packed with fat. Some called it survival food, but to many it was simply tradition. A stew that turned pests into power and reminded every child at the fire that nothing from the earth was wasted. Some even believed the worms gave extra strength for winter hunts, a quiet wisdom passed down in each wooden bowl. 2. Buffalo blood pudding. When a buffalo was hunted, nothing was thrown away, not the bones, not the hide, and definitely not the blood. Among plains tribes like the Lakota and Cheyenne, buffalo blood was collected fresh from the hunt and with herbs, fat, and ground-up organ meat. The thick mixture was then poured into a stomach or cleaned intestine and boiled over a fire until it firmed into a dark, rich pudding. The result? A dense, iron-packed sausage that could be sliced, dried, or eaten warm. It wasn't just food, it was fuel, rich in protein and spirit. Some tribes believed the blood carried the life force of the buffalo, and by eating it, they honored the animal's sacrifice and absorbed its strength. To outsiders, it may sound off-putting, but for the people of the plains, this dish was a sacred connection to the land, a way to eat with gratitude, not just hunger. Sometimes it was served with berries or roots to balance the strong flavor. And in harsh winters, just a few slices could mean the difference between weakness and survival. 3. Smoked beaver tail. To many tribes in the northern forests, the beaver wasn't just a clever animal, it was a lifeline. And its tail? That was the prize. Beaver tail was thick, fatty, and covered in a tough, leathery skin. But once it was skinned, cleaned, and slow-smoked over cedar wood, it turned into something else. Rich, gelatinous, and deeply flavorful. Tribes like the Ojibwe and Cree prized it during cold months when fat was hard to come by. It was often cooked whole, then sliced and shared in small bites, not for the faint of heart, but treasured for its warmth and energy. Elders believed it helped keep the body strong during long winters when hunting was hard and the cold cut deep. Some called it the forest's butter, because just a little would coat your mouth and stick to your ribs. And if you were offered a piece, you didn't say no, not just out of respect, but because it meant you were being trusted with something sacred. Even today, a few remote communities still remember the taste, not for pleasure, but for the power it gave when food was scarce. 4. Roasted grasshopper cakes. Out on the plains, when big game was scarce and the land turned dry, Native American tribes turned to something small, but packed with protein. Grasshoppers. Didn't just eat them raw. Grasshoppers were caught in bundles, roasted until crisp, then ground and mixed with cornmeal, herbs, and water to form small cakes. These were fried on hot stones or cooked over an open fire. The result? Crunchy on the outside, chewy inside, with a nutty, earthy flavor. They were easy to carry, didn't spoil, and gave warriors energy for long days of travel or hunting. In some tribes, kids even saw them as a treat. It might sound strange now, but back then, If the ground was crawling, you weren't starving, you were blessed. Some stories even say the crunch of these cakes could be heard before you smelled the smoke, a signal that food, however humble, was being shared. And deep in tribal memory, one version of this cake had a mystery ingredient only added during sacred hunts. What was it? Let's just say, the next recipe on this list might have you looking twice at your backyard. 5. Corn and ash cakes baked in the ground. It was survival science. Native American cooks didn't need ovens. They dug shallow pits, filled them with hot coals, and buried dough wrapped in husks right into the earth. Made from cornmeal, water, and sometimes mashed beans or wild seeds, the dough would bake slowly under the ashes. What came out was a smoky, chewy cake with a toasted crust and soft center. The ash gave it an earthy taste and sometimes even added minerals missing from the diet. Some tribes believed this method gave the food more power, as if the earth itself was feeding them. And here's the strange part. Under the charred crust, the cake often had a hidden filling or flavor. One you'd never guess came from something buried underground. These cakes weren't just made for meals. They were also used in ceremonies, offered to spirits, or shared during seasonal festivals. Kids grew up learning not just how to cook them, but how to read them, like messages baked in smoke and soil. 6. Pond lily root mash. Pond lilies may look peaceful floating on still water, but beneath them, that's where the real treasure lay. Tribes across the southeast waded into the mud, searching for the thick white roots, twisted, heavy, and packed with starch. They'd boil them for hours, sometimes mash them with wild onions or a bit of fat if they had it. The result? A bitter, earthy paste that stuck to your ribs and stayed with you. It wasn't made to taste good. It was made to last, through long winters, empty hunts, and hungry bellies. But not all roots were safe. Some carried a poison you couldn't see. No spots, no color change, just a quiet danger that crept in after dark.
In this video, I'm going to show you.
If the steam hissed like a snake and the air turned sour, you didn't eat it. You covered it back with soil and gave it back to the earth. And that hissing sound? The sharp, foul smell rising with the steam? It shows up again in the next dish, only this time it came from the meat itself. Because, yes, the next recipe started with a skunk. 7. Boiled skunk with juniper berries. You read that right. Skunk. Boiled, not burned, not hidden, but carefully prepared and served by families who knew exactly what they were doing. In parts of the Great Plains and the Southwest, when game ran low, tribes turned to whatever the land gave. Skunks were trapped, cleaned with precision, and boiled slowly with herbs like juniper berries, which masked the musky odor and gave the meat a wild, piney flavor. The trick wasn't just in cooking it, it was in not messing it up. Back, and the only way to cook it was with hot stones. 8. Wood rat on hot stones. High in the deserts and canyons of the Southwest, tribe Ute hunted a creature most folks today wouldn't even touch, the wood rat. Not a sewer rat, not a garbage scavenger, but a wild, clean-eating animal that lived off cactus, seeds, and desert roots. They trapped them at night, skinned and gutted them at dawn, and then came the magic, cooking them on heated river stones buried in the earth. The meat was wrapped in leaves or laid directly on the rocks, then covered with more stones and soil, turning the desert floor into a slow cooker. The result? A crisp outer sear with juicy, tender meat inside, slightly gamey, slightly sweet, and in lean times, absolutely treasured. Kids were taught how to hunt them quietly, how to prep them without waste, and how to share every bite. Because in a land with little water and fewer guarantees, even the smallest catch was sacred. But deep in the desert, there was one catch even rarer than the wood rat, And it wasn't born. It was still growing in the womb. 9. Deer fetus stew. It was a dish never spoken of lightly for the harshest winters or sacred occasions. Among some plains and woodland tribes, when a pregnant doe was hunted for survival, the unborn fawn was not discarded. It was honored. The tiny fetus, still soft and undeveloped, was simmered gently into a stew with wild onions, roots, and sometimes crushed juniper or mint. The meat was delicate, almost gelatinous, and deeply rich in nutrients. It was said to strengthen the weak, aid recovery, and connect the eater with the spirit of the deer in its purest form. This wasn't a casual meal. It was made with quiet hands and eaten in silence. Some elders believed that by consuming life before it fully formed, you carried its future and its memory inside you. To many, it was one of the most powerful meals a person could ever be offered. But if that and all, armed with sticks, baskets, and smoke, they'd gather the swarms, then roast them alive on hot stones until their bodies crackled and smoked. Once charred, the ants were ground into a fine, dark powder and boiled with water, herbs, and sometimes crushed seeds or dried cactus fruit. The result? A tangy, almost citrusy broth with a smoky finish, packed with protein, minerals, and yes, heat. Some say the stingers gave it a spicy kick that lingered in the throat. It was used not just as food,